the light of 1,000 suns, captured and tamed, refracted through the crystalline hull of the Glypton delegation vessel, casting a kaleidoscope of silent music across its interior. For Kaelen-Sha, first emissary of the Glypton conquered, the sensation was akin to a symphony. Their own body, a complex lattice of biosilicate, resonated with the Citadel's ambient energy, a gentle hum that spoke of power on a scale their species had only theorized. The Citadel was not a station. It was a testament, a fragment of a Dyson sphere built around a stable white dwarf, its inner surface a sprawling metropolis of impossibly diverse architecture that housed the Galactic Council. It was the heart of known space, and the Glyptons, newly discovered and freshly uplifted, were about to become its newest, most fragile beat. Kaelen-Sha's form, a bipedal structure of interlocking translucent plates, shimmered as they processed the flood of new data. Glyptons perceived the world through vibration, light, and direct energy transfer. The Citadel was a cacophony of life. To their left, a delegation of Cathar, insected beings with carapaces of iridescent chitin, communicated in a series of sharp, percussive clicks and the agitated rustle of their 6 limbs. Ahead, Illumina drifted, a being of coherent plasma held in a complex containment field, its thoughts expressed as shifting patterns of color and heat. The air, a carefully calibrated mix of 27 different atmospheric blends, carried the sense of methane, ammonia, and something vaguely floral that Kaelen-Sha's internal sensors could not identify. It was overwhelming, glorious, and utterly logical. Every species here had earned its place through millennia of development, technological ascendancy, or sheer, indomitable will. A guide, a placid, multi-jointed automaton, led them toward the grand chamber. The primary session will commence in 1.3 standard cycles. It droned in a synthesized, perfectly neutral tone. Your designation is Spire 72. Your assigned mentor species will be the J-Car. This was a good sign. The J-Car were one of the elder races, silicon-based life forms who resembled mountains given ambulatory purpose. They were known for their patience and their unassailable logic, traits the Glyptons deeply admired. Kaelen-Sha's internal plates chimed with a frequency of pleased anticipation. This introduction to the galactic community was proceeding exactly as their predictive models had indicated. Orderly, structured, rational. The grand chamber was a colossal amphitheater carved from the Dyson fragment itself. Gravity plating allowed delegates to occupy their designated spires along the curved walls, creating a sphere of observation around the central podium where the Arbiter, a being of pure energy, pulsed gently. Kaelen-Sha took their position in Spire 72, their crystalline feet meshing securely with the floor. They surveyed the assembly, a living library of galactic evolution. There were the hulking Vorn, Ursine warriors whose personal shields shimmered even in the peaceful environment of the chamber, their growled conversations causing subtle vibrations in the deck plating. There were the ethereal Signans, avian creatures with wings of pure light, who communicated in melodic songs that echoed through the vast space. Each species projected an aura of power, a history of survival and dominance written in their very biology. Then Kaelen-Sha saw them. The data files had called them humans. The Glypton emissary had, of course, reviewed the preliminary data packet, bipedal, carbon-based, endoskeletal, originating from a high-gravity, Death World-class planet. The term Death World had implied a certain resilience, a baked-in toughness. The reality was underwhelming. 2 of them entered their designated spire across the chamber. They were small compared to the Vorn, fragile compared to the Cathar, and disconcertingly soft-looking. They were encased in pliable fabrics, their pinkish-tan skin exposed on their faces and hands. They lacked any obvious natural weapons, no claws, no fangs, no carapace. Their movements were fluid but lacked the intimidating precision of the warrior races. One of them, a female according to the file, smiled at a passing delegate, a bearing of small, flat teeth that, according to the cultural primer, was a sign of amity. It looked like a threat display malfunction. Kaelen-Sha accessed the data again. Species, human, threat level unspecified, status, council founders. The last part was clearly a data error. It was impossible. How could these soft, squishy creatures have been founders of a council that included the J-Car and the Lumina? It defied every logical parameter. Perhaps they were a client race, a protected species that was given a title out of sentimentality. That seemed the most probable conclusion. The session began. The arbiter's voice was not sound but a direct-to-consciousness transmission, a wave of pure information that needed no translation. The topics were mundane: trade disputes between the sulfur-breathing clans of Rigel 7, migratory path adjustments for the great stellar cetaceans, a debate over the classification of a new quasi-sentient fungus. Kaelen-Sha observed the humans. Their representative, the female, listened attentively. She made a few notes on a wafer-thin data slate. She did not speak. Yet Kaelen-Sha noticed something peculiar. When the Vorn delegate, a behemoth named Grak, boomed his opinion on a mining rights issue, his gaze flickered almost imperceptibly towards the human spire, as if seeking a reaction. When he received none, he seemed to deflate slightly, his posture becoming less aggressive. A similar phenomenon occurred with the Cathar delegation. The normally belligerent insectoids kept their clicks and rustles to a minimum whenever the debate veered towards a topic the humans might have an interest in. This was illogical. The behavior of these powerful, demonstrably dangerous species was inconsistent with the physical presentation of the humans. It was a puzzle, and Kaelen-Sha's mind, which craved order and reason, began to hum with a low-frequency vibration of disquiet. After the session, the automaton guide led Kaelen-Sha to meet their mentor. Elder Thrax of the J-Car was magnificent, a craggy monolith of living stone whose slow, deliberate movements seemed to bend time around him. His voice was the grinding of tectonic plates, yet it carried a profound sense of peace. "Welcome, emissary of the Glypton," Thrax rumbled, his crystalline eyes, facets of pure quartz, glowing with a soft internal light. "We are pleased to guide you. Your species values logic. This is a good foundation. The Council, however, is often illogical." "I have already observed this, Elder Thrax," Kaelen-Sha resonated, the chimes of their speech pattern respectful. "I confess my primary analysis is encountering a significant anomaly." "Ah," Thrax said, a sound like falling rocks. "The humans." The directness of the statement surprised Kaelen-Sha. "Indeed, the data is contradictory. They are physically unimpressive, yet they command a deference from species that could, by all physical metrics, dismantle them with trivial effort. My initial hypothesis of them being a sentimental client race seems flawed." Thrax was silent for a long moment, a silence so deep Kaelen-Sha could feel the station's core processors vibrating through the floor. "Your hypothesis is not merely flawed, it is dangerously naive. Let my first piece of guidance be this, emissary: 3 rules for dealing with humankind. 1. Never lie to them, they will know. Do not ask how. Simply accept that they will. 2. Never, under any circumstances, threaten something they consider theirs. The definition of this term is fluid and can encompass anything from a star system to a favored pet. 3. If a human ever tells you that you are crossing a line, you do not walk back from that line. You cease all forward momentum, you apologize, and you leave. Immediately." The gravity of the pronouncement was absolute. It was not advice. It was a law of nature, delivered by a being who had seen galaxies born. "With respect, Elder Thrax," Kaelen-Sha chimed, their internal light flickering with confusion. "That seems disproportionate. What is the basis for this protocol? What is the source of their power? Is it technological, biological?" "Yes," Thrax rumbled. "It is, and that is all I will say on the matter for now. Observation is the most effective teacher. Go to the public spheres, watch them. You will learn." Following Thrax's advice, Kaelen-Sha made their way to one of the Citadel's many communal nexuses, a vast, terraced plaza where beings from 100 worlds mingled. Artificial sunlight bathed gardens growing alien flora, and the air was a tapestry of strange languages and exotic scents. Kaelen-Sha found a quiet alcove to observe. It didn't take long. The same human female from the council chamber was there, sitting at a small table with a cup of some steaming brown liquid. She was alone, reading from her data slate. A Vorn, not the delegate Grak but another of his species, just as large and intimidating, was stomping through the plaza, clearly agitated about something. He wasn't watching where he was going. He blundered into the human's table, sending her cup and slate clattering to the ground. The effect was instantaneous and baffling. The Vorn froze. His entire body, which had been a study in aggressive forward motion, locked into a statue of pure horror. His fur bristled and a low, pathetic whine escaped his throat. The human, startled, looked up from the mess on the floor. "Oh, bother," she said, her voice mild. The Vorn fell to his knees. It was not a gesture of respect. It was an act of utter, reflexive submission. He began stammering apologies in his own guttural language, then switched to clumsy, heavily accented Galactic Standard. "Apologies, honored ambassador, clumsiness, unforgivable. I will provide recompense. My entire clan's salt harvest for a cycle, please." Kaelen-Sha's logic processors whirred, trying to find a framework for this interaction. A minor accident, a spilled beverage. The response was that of a warrior who had just accidentally struck the egg clutch of his own matriarch. The human, whose name was apparently Ambassador Reed, simply laughed. It was a soft, airy sound. "Hey, it's all right." "No, really." "It's fine," she said, bending down to pick up her slate. "It was just synth calf, no big deal." She looked at the terrified Vorn kneeling before her. "Please get up, you're making a scene." The Vorn looked at her, his large, dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He scrambled to his feet, bowed so low his snout nearly touched the deck, and then backed away, step by agonizing step, as if retreating from an unstable antimatter reactor. He didn't turn his back on her until he was a dozen paces away, at which point he fled as if the furies of his homeworld's hell were at his heels. Ambassador Reed sighed, wiped her slate clean with a piece of her clothing, and went to get another cup of the brown liquid. A few other beings in the plaza had watched the exchange. None seemed surprised. They merely gave the human a wide berth, their expressions, or what passed for them, a mixture of respect and something Kaelen-Sha was beginning to identify as deep-seated anxiety. Kaelen-Sha's internal plates vibrated with a dissonant chord. This was not deference. This was not respect. This was fear. A profound, instinctual fear, born of something so terrible that the mere possibility of offending one of these soft, fragile creatures was enough to make a Vorn warrior grovel. The puzzle of humanity was no longer a simple data anomaly. It was a gaping chasm in the logical foundation of the galaxy, and Kaelen-Sha felt a new sensation, one for which their language had no precise word. It was a cold, sharp resonance that vibrated not in their crystalline body, but in the very core of their consciousness. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing that the slightest misstep would lead to a fall of unknown and perhaps infinite depth. And the humans were the cliff. In the following cycles, Kaelen-Sha dedicated their efforts to understanding the human paradox. The direct approach had yielded only cryptic warnings, so the Glypton emissary turned to the Citadel's vast archives, the repository of all public knowledge accumulated since the Council's inception. Logic dictated that the truth must lie in the data, buried in historical records and military analyses. A species did not garner such a reputation without a history to justify it. The archive was a non-physical space, a neural interface construct where one could navigate seas of information as if they were tangible landscapes. Kaelen-Sha's crystalline consciousness translated the experience into familiar sensory inputs. Vast libraries of light, corridors of resonating data streams. They sought out files on humanity, specifically files pertaining to interspecies conflict. The first anomaly was the sheer number of redactions. Entire sections, sometimes spanning centuries of galactic history, were sealed with security protocols far exceeding their apparent importance. Kaelen-Sha could access the K-Tharvorn border skirmishes in full holographic detail. They could review the J-Car's philosophical schism that led to a brief but devastating civil war 3 millennia ago. But when it came to human conflicts, the records were pristine, sterile, and maddeningly vague. They found a record of the Orion Incident. A species called the Genarl, a rapacious empire of silicon-based marauders, had attempted to annex a series of human colony worlds. The Genarl were tough, resilient, and had a significant fleet advantage. The Council had prepared for a protracted, bloody war. The official record stated that the conflict lasted precisely 73 standard cycles. It ended with the Genarl's unconditional surrender. There were no fleet engagement reports, no casualty lists, no strategic breakdowns. The file simply stated, "Conflict resolved via Terran mandate intervention. Gnarl Empire integrated into the Orion Protectorate as a probationary member." The Gnarl were now a peaceful, almost monastic species known for their intricate sand sculptures. It made no sense. Frustrated, Kaelen-Sha refined their search. If direct conflict data was sealed, perhaps ancillary information would provide clues. They began cross-referencing technological development timelines. They found that human technology progressed in bizarre, non-linear leaps. For centuries, they would appear to stagnate, content with established physics and engineering. Then, when faced with a new existential threat, their entire scientific paradigm would shift in the span of a single generation. They didn't just improve their technology. They reinvented the fundamental principles upon which it was based. One file, barely a footnote in a larger report on warp drive efficiency, mentioned the Signan impasse. The avian Signans, during a period of aggressive expansionism eons ago, had blockaded a human sector using their unique ability to fold spacetime locally, creating inescapable gravitational pockets. Standard warp drives were useless. The humans were trapped. The Council expected them to sue for peace. Instead, less than a decade later, human ships emerged from the sector. They were no longer using warp drives. They had, according to the single, unredacted line in the report, developed a method of extra-dimensional traversal by mapping consciousness onto quantum foam. The Signans had withdrawn their blockade immediately, not because they were defeated, but because they could no longer comprehend the rules of the game. This was the emerging pattern. Humans didn't seem to win wars, they made them irrelevant. They didn't break their enemies, they redefined them. It was a form of conflict so alien to the Glypton mindset of quantifiable force and strategic application that Kaelen-Sha struggled to even form a cohesive hypothesis. Deciding a new perspective was needed, Kaelen-Sha sought out the Cathar ambassador, a formidable creature named Xyler. The insectoid's private chambers were humid and smelled of loam and ozone. Xyler stood over a holographic map, her multifaceted eyes tracking fleet movements in some distant nebula. "Emissary Kaelen-Sha," she clicked, her mandibles vibrating with the sound. "Your presence is unexpected. You have a query." It wasn't a question. The Cathar were direct. "I do, Ambassador," Kaelen-Sha resonated. "It concerns the humans. My research into their history is inconclusive. I have been told they are dangerous. I wish to understand the nature of this danger." Xyler stilled. The rustling of her wings ceased. For a full minute she was motionless, a predator assessing a strange new element in its environment. "The archives are sealed for a reason, Glypton. Some knowledge is a burden. My species thrives on data. A lack of it is a greater burden than any truth could be," Kaelen-Sha replied, their own form rigid. The Cathar ambassador made a low chittering sound, the insectoid equivalent of a sigh. "Very well, you seek data. I will provide a single data point. Long ago, before the current council accords were solidified, my people were more ambitious. We saw a newly colonized human world, rich in resources and poorly defended. A logical acquisition, our matriarchs decreed it so. We sent a subjugation fleet, 3 battle clusters, overwhelming force." Xyler turned from the map to face Kaelen-Sha directly. Her large, black eyes seemed to hold the cold of the void. "We did not anticipate their response. They did not meet our fleet in open space. That would have been honorable. That would have been logical. Instead, they waited. They let our ground forces land. They let us establish beachheads and begin subjugating the population centers. The humans offered little resistance. They were soft, fragile. It was, our commanders reported, an easy conquest." She paused, the silence stretching. "On the 7th day it began. Our soldiers' armor began to fail, not from weapon impacts but from the inside out. A nanite plague, tailored to consume the specific alloys of our technology. Our weapons turned to dust in our claws. Our vehicles dissolved. In a single cycle, our entire ground army was disarmed." Kaelen-Sha's internal resonance faltered. This was beyond conventional warfare. "But that was not the worst of it," Xyler continued, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "Then they targeted our biology. They had analyzed our genome from the few soldiers we had lost in the initial skirmishes. They synthesized a retrovirus and introduced it into the planet's atmosphere. It was not lethal. Death would have been a mercy. No, this virus was elegant. It targeted the glands that produce our combat pheromones, the very chemical signals that allow us to fight as a unified swarm. It replaced them with a new compound, a pheromone of terror. Our soldiers turned on each other. Brothers tore brothers apart in mindless panic. The swarm intelligence that defines our species collapsed into a cacophony of individual screaming madness. We did not just lose a battle, Glipton. The humans made our greatest strength, our unity, into a weapon to destroy ourselves. We were forced to glass our own landing zones from orbit just to euthanize our own troops and contain the plague of fear. Xyler leaned closer, her sharp mandibles clicking just inches from Kaelen-Sha's face. Do you understand now? We can fight beings who have bigger ships. We can fight beings who have more powerful lasers. How do you fight a species that will weaponize the very concept of your own soul against you? They do not seek to defeat you. They seek to make you impossible. Kaelen-Sha retreated a step, their crystalline form pulsing with a chaotic, discordant light. The story was a piece of data that actively resisted logical integration. It was like trying to solve an equation where the numbers themselves changed their value based on who was observing them. Still reeling from the Cathar's tale, Kaelen-Sha felt compelled to approach the source of the mystery directly. They found Ambassador Evelyn Reed in one of the Citadel's arboretums, a vast, zero-gravity sphere where flora from hundreds of worlds grew in a tangle of bioluminescent beauty. She was tending to a small, Earth-native plant with delicate green leaves and tiny white flowers. She hummed a tuneless, simple melody. She looked up as Kaelen-Sha approached, her expression open and friendly. "Emissary Kaelen-Sha," she said with that strange, teeth-baring gesture of a smile. "It's good to see you. Enjoying the gardens." "They are an impressive display of biodiversity," Kaelen-Sha resonated, struggling to reconcile the gentle being before them with the architect of the Cathar's psychological damnation. "Ambassador, may I ask a question of you?" "Of course, Evelyn is fine," she said, pinching a dead leaf from the plant. "Ask away. My understanding of your species is incomplete. Other races in the Council hold you in a state of profound apprehension. Yet, all my direct observations show your people to be peaceful, even gentle." Evelyn Reed looked at the small flower in her hand. Her smile faded, replaced by something more complex, something weary. "We prefer it that way. Peace is a much more efficient state of being. It leaves more time for gardening." "But efficiency is not always an option," Kaelen-Sha pressed. "The Cathar, I have learned of your past conflict with them." The ambassador's eyes, a soft shade of blue, met Kaelen-Sha's. They were no longer friendly. They were ancient as the Jakars, but filled with a fire the stone beings lacked. The Cathar made a mistake. They saw a house and decided they wanted to live in it, without asking the family that was already inside. They learned that we are very, very particular about our homes. Her tone was still soft, but it carried an undertone of tempered steel. "You know we have a saying on Earth, speak softly and carry a big stick. It's not quite right. Our philosophy is more, speak softly, and be the reason everyone else in the room is carrying a stick. We don't want to fight. We have fought so much in our own history. We clawed our way off our own planet, fighting ourselves every step of the way. We have perfected the art of conflict in ways you cannot possibly imagine. We've fought over land, over ideas, over gods. We've turned every science we've ever discovered into a weapon, from the atom to the mind itself." She turned back to her plant. "We don't want to do it again, so we are very, very polite. We build gardens, we write poetry, we make friends. We do everything in our power to ensure no one ever gives us a reason to stop." The implication was clear, hanging in the humid air of the arboretum, more potent than any overt threat. The fear the other races felt wasn't just because of what humanity could do. It was because of what they would do, without hesitation, if they felt they had no other choice. Their peacefulness wasn't a state of being. It was a cage, self-imposed, holding back a monster of their own creation. Desperate for a final piece of empirical evidence, Kaelen-Sha used their species' unique ability. Glyptons could resonate with data systems, subtly vibrating through security layers like sound through a wall. It was a forbidden technique, a violation of council law, but the need to know had become an obsession. They targeted the Citadel's deep archives, the ones even ambassadors couldn't access without unanimous council approval. They searched for the most heavily encrypted file they could find related to humanity. They found one. It was labeled simply Incident 001 Raxil. The encryption was like a mountain of diamond. Kaelen-Sha focused all their energy, their crystalline body glowing brightly, resonating at a frequency that threatened to shatter their own form. For a terrifying moment, the security systems pushed back, a wave of pure digital force. Then something gave. A single data packet, corrupted and fragmented, leaked through. It wasn't a battle report. It was a Raxil psychological transcript. The Raxil were, or had been, a species of telepathic conquerors, their empire built on psychic domination. The transcript was the final communication of their grand prognosticator before their entire species simply ceased to be a threat. The text flickered in Kaelen-Sha's consciousness. They do not fight. They cannot be on the battlefield because they make the battlefield irrelevant. They sent us a song. Just a song carried on a simple radio wave. We heard it across our worlds. It was beautiful and it was poison. The song, it didn't kill us. It showed us. It showed us the heat death of the universe. It showed us the futility of ambition. It mapped the inevitable decay of all things, not as a theory but as an emotional certainty. It was a mathematical proof for despair. Our will to conquer is gone. Our will to build is gone. Our will to procreate is gone. The song took our future and showed it to us, an endless plain of gray dust. They did not defeat our minds. They convinced our minds to defeat themselves. The final fragment of the transcript was just 3 words, repeated over and over until the recording ended in static. They unmade us. They unmade us. They unmade us. Kaelen-Sha recoiled from the archive, their bodies shaking so violently that their own chimes became a sound of pure agony. The cold resonance of unease they had felt before was now a screaming certainty. The other species were not afraid of humanity's weapons. They were not afraid of their ships or their soldiers. They were afraid that humanity could reach into their souls and switch them off. The crisis arrived, as all true crises do, without warning. A scout drone on the edge of the Perseus Arm, a region of space bordering both Glypton and human territory, sent back a single, terrifying data burst before being annihilated. It was the Void Swarm. They were not a species in the conventional sense. They were a nomadic scourge, a biomechanical plague that moved from system to system, consuming all matter and energy, converting it into more of themselves. They did not negotiate. They did not reason. They only devoured, and their trajectory was taking them directly towards a nascent star system containing the first Glypton off-world colony and a human agricultural outpost called New Eden. An emergency session of the Galactic Council was called. The Grand Chamber, usually a place of measured debate, buzzed with a palpable current of fear. The Vorn delegate Grak slammed a massive fist on his console. We must meet them with force. The Grand Armada of Vorn can form a bulwark at the Janus Nebula. We will break them against our shields. Xyler, the Cathar ambassador, clicked her mandibles in sharp dissent. A foolish strategy. A static defense is suicide against a foe that numerous. We must engage in swift, preemptive strikes, target their presumed hive minds, disrupt their command structure before they can organize a full-scale assault. Even the placid, gaseous lumina swirled with agitated colors. Containment, they pulsed. A quarantine field. Sacrifice the outer systems if we must, but halt their advance at all costs. Every species proposed a solution born of its own nature. The Vorn saw a wall to be broken, the Cathar a foe to be outmaneuvered, the Lumina a problem to be isolated. And all of them, after stating their case, turned their attention to the human spire. Ambassador Evelyn Reed had remained silent throughout the increasingly frantic debate. She listened, her expression calm, her hands resting on her console. Kaelen-Sha watched her, the memory of the Raxil transcript a shard of ice in their consciousness. The small, soft primate who tended flowers was about to respond to an existential threat. Finally, the Arbiter's silent, commanding presence focused the room. Ambassador Reed, the Terran mandate has been silent. The Void Swarm threatens your people as well as the new conquered members. What is your proposal? Evelyn Reed stood. A hush fell over the chamber. Even the air seemed to still. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the vast room, as clear and sharp as breaking glass. The Terran Mandate has assessed the threat. We concur with the Cathar analysis that a conventional military engagement would be inefficient. It would result in an unacceptable loss of material and personnel for all our nations. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Therefore, we will not be deploying the 3rd or 5th battle fleets. A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the delegates. Grak the Vorn grunted. Then you propose to do nothing. You will let this plague consume your new Eden. Reed's gaze shifted to him, and for a fleeting instant, Kaelen-Sha saw that ancient, fiery look in her eyes again. On the contrary, Delegate Grak, we will be resolving the situation. We have authorized a non-kinetic solution. The phrase hung in the air. Kaelen-Sha's internal translators searched for a corollary. Non-kinetic. Not based on motion, on physical force. The term was meaningless in the context of stopping a devouring swarm the size of a small moon, but the reaction from the elder races was immediate and profound. Elder Thrax of the J-Car seemed to settle, a mountain coming to rest. The Lumina's frantic colors softened to a calm, steady blue. Xyler actually retracted her aggressive forward posture, a clear sign of Cathar deference. They understood, and they were relieved. We request 2 things from this council, Reed continued, her voice even. Full access to all long-range sensor data on the swarm's composition and current trajectory. And we request a dedicated, priority channel to the primary communication frequency used by the swarm hive minds. The request was so bizarre, so contrary to any known military doctrine, that Kaelen-Sha would have dismissed it as insanity just a few cycles ago. Communicating with the swarm was like negotiating with a wildfire, yet the council granted the request instantly, without debate. The arbiter pulsed a single affirmative wave. Granted. Reed gave a slight nod. Thank you. We anticipate the threat will be neutralized within 1 standard cycle. She then sat down, picked up her data slate, and began reviewing what looked like agricultural reports, as if the matter was already concluded. Kaelen-Sha's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting data and terrifying hypotheses. A non-kinetic solution. Communication. They remembered the Raxil and their song of despair. They remembered the Cathar and their pheromones of terror. What could they possibly say to a being whose only concept was hunger? Elder Thrax's rumbling voice echoed in Kaelen-Sha's mind, transmitted on a private, resonant frequency. Come with me, emissary. It is time for your final lesson. What you are about to witness is never entered into the public record. It is shown only to those who must understand the nature of the balance we keep. Thrax led Kaelen-Sha from the Grand Chamber to a small, shielded observation dome deep in the Citadel's core. The interior was dark, dominated by a single, vast holographic display. Most new species believe human power lies in their adaptable technology or their capacity for total warfare. The J-Car rumbled, his stone form absorbing the light. They are wrong, those are merely symptoms. Their true power is far more fundamental. He activated the display. It shimmered to life, showing a real-time feed from the deep space sensors. The void swarm was a terrifying sight, a roiling cloud of black, jagged bioships, a storm of pure destruction moving through the void. On a side panel, data streams flowed, showing the swarm's internal communications. It was a chaotic roar of instinct, a single unified psychic scream of hunger. Consume, grow. Observe, Thrax commanded. A new signal appeared on the display originating from human space. It was labeled Terran Mandate, Non-Kinetic Transmission Project Nightingale. It wasn't a weapon's energy signature. It was a simple, impossibly complex broadcast wave aimed directly at the swarm. The humans were talking to it, but they weren't sending language. Kaelen-Sha, with their sensitivity to energy patterns, could perceive the transmission structure. It was a cascade of pure mathematics, biological data, and something else, something abstract that resonated like a story. What are they doing? Kaelen-Sha chimed, their form vibrating with tension. The swarm operates on a single primal instinct, the need to consume resources to replicate, Thrax explained. It is a simple, powerful imperative. The humans are not trying to fight that imperative. They are editing it. On the screen, the broadcast began to interleave with the swarm's psychic noise. The humans were introducing new information into the swarm's collective consciousness. First, they sent a complete astronomical survey of the galaxy, 1 billion times more detailed than any known map. It highlighted regions of space teeming with nebulae rich in primordial matter, young stars bursting with harvestable energy, feeding grounds 1,000 times richer than the Perseus arm. It was a feast laid out before a starving creature. Then, the transmission changed. It began broadcasting the complete genome of the swarm itself, something no one had ever been able to decode. But it included something new, a simulated model of the swarm's future. It showed them expanding, consuming, growing, and then, inevitably, running out of fuel. It showed them starving in the intergalactic void, their own imperative leading them to a slow, agonizing death. It was a mathematical proof for extinction. Finally, the masterstroke. The humans introduced a new concept into the swarm's mind. It wasn't a word. It was a complex data packet that combined the drive for survival with the principle of efficiency. They were teaching the swarm the idea of patience. They were teaching it planning. They were teaching it farming instead of stripping. The effect on the swarm was immediate and catastrophic to its current state. The single-minded roar of hunger fractured. New thoughts, alien concepts began to bloom within the hive mind. Preservation, cultivation, future. The chaotic advance faltered. Individual bioships began to break formation, their movements becoming erratic. The swarm, for the first time in its recorded history, was confused. It was thinking. Then, the final part of the human transmission arrived. It was a new set of coordinates pointing to one of the rich, uninhabited nebulae they had shown it. It wasn't a command. It was a suggestion, a choice. Here is a better place. Here you can survive not just for now, but for eons. The roiling cloud of black ships hung in space for a long, tense moment. The psychic chaos subsided, replaced by a single, unified, and utterly new directive. The entire void swarm, as one, turned. It abandoned its course towards New Eden and the Glypton colony and began a long, steady journey towards the new coordinates. It was no longer a plague. It had become a migrator. Kaelen-Sha stared, their mind utterly silent. They had just witnessed a species defeat an enemy by giving it a future. They had turned a monster into a farmer by teaching it math. It was warfare on a conceptual, ontological level. They do not destroy their enemies, emissary. Thrax's voice was a low, final rumble. They change them. They rewrite the fundamental axioms of their existence until they are no longer an enemy. This is a power no shield can stop. No weapon can match. To declare war on humanity is not to risk defeat. It is to risk the complete and utter erasure of everything you are. That is why we fear them. Not for the violence they can bring, but for the softness that can unmake a universe. Kaelen-Sha returned to the Grand Chamber just as the official report came in. The void swarm had altered its course and was no longer a threat. A wave of palpable relief washed over the assembly. Delegate Grack was praising the mysterious power of the Terran mandate. Xyler was uncharacteristically silent, her antennae twitching nervously. Kaelen-Sha looked across the chamber at Evelyn Reed. She was laughing softly at something her colleague had said, her face open and expressive. The soft, pink primate, the gardener, the poet, the being who could talk a hurricane into becoming a gentle breeze. For the first time, Kaelen-Sha understood. True power wasn't the ability to destroy. It was the ability to control the nature of reality itself. And humanity, for all its fragility and softness, had mastered it. They were not the galaxy's warriors. They were its gods, and they were terrifyingly humble about it. Many cycles passed. The Glypton conquered integrated smoothly into the Galactic Council. Kaelen-Sha became a respected, if quiet, voice of reason. They learned the unspoken rules, the subtle currents of power that flowed beneath the surface of galactic politics. They learned to interpret the nuances of a human's smile, to understand the weight of their silences. One day, a new species was introduced to the Council. They were the Illyrians, a proud, powerful race of avian predators from the galactic core. Their ambassador, a magnificent creature with feathers of spun metal and eyes like polished obsidian, surveyed the chamber with an air of arrogant confidence. Their gaze swept over the Vorn with dismissal, the Cathar with contempt, and finally it rested on the human delegation. Kaelen-Sha saw the flicker of confusion and disdain in the Illyrians' eyes. They saw the soft, unimpressive primates and drew the same logical and fatally flawed conclusion Kaelen-Sha once had. Later in the Nexuses, Kaelen-Sha saw the Illyrian ambassador posturing, boasting of their species, military might, and their unblemished record of conquest. They were loud, aggressive, and utterly blind to the nature of the ecosystem they had just entered. With a soft chime of resonating crystal, Kaelen-Sha approached them. The Illyrian looked down, its sharp beak glinting. "What is it, crystal form? Have you come to admire the new power in this council?" Kaelen-Sha's light patterns were calm and steady. "I have come to offer a word of guidance as it was once offered to me." They leaned in, their voice a low, melodic hum that only the Illyrian could hear. "Observe the small, soft-skinned ones. The ones inspire fortitude. Be polite, be truthful. Answer their questions honestly, no matter how trivial they seem." The Glypton emissary paused, letting their words sink in. They looked at the human delegation across the plaza, where Evelyn Reed was showing another delegate a picture of a small, furry creature from her homeworld she called a cat. Then they turned back to the Illyrian, their internal light dimming to a serious, cautionary glow. "And pray to whatever gods you hold dear that you never, ever give them a reason to consider you a problem to be solved."